Welcome to the Choir Conductor Podcast. Each episode features a conversation with people in the choir or music education profession. I am your host, Zach Thompson. Let's start the show. My guest today is Austin Wolford. Austin was actually one of my first guests on this podcast. However, due to some technical difficulties, the entire episode ended up being lost. And it was really frustrating at the time. But I'm really glad and thankful for Austin for being willing to come back and record this episode about 3 years later. Austin gives some great advice for not only new music educators, but for those of us that have been doing this for a little bit. He offers a great free way to do a kind of an alternative virtual choir and some other ideas for virtual learning during this time of COVID-19. Make sure you stick around to the end. He gives some wonderful advice about talking to or really being your own person. I don't want to give away too much, but Austin he's been a great guest. I've known him for a while. I'm also excited that this podcast is now available to listen on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Podcast Addict, Anchor, and Spotify. So a lot of different places. You can also watch this podcast on my YouTube channel, which I will put a link in the description. I'm also excited that this podcast is starting to grow in numbers. Now that I have better data from Anchor, I'm able to see where my listeners are located. For the most part, most of them are in the United States. However, there are a growing number in several countries throughout the world, such as India, Australia, Canada, Brazil, the United Kingdom, Nigeria, Ireland, Taiwan, Denmark, Indonesia, and Japan. It's really fascinating to see that people all over the world are listening and getting value out of this podcast. I would love to hear from any of you, whether you're in the United States or in another country. You can go to my website and fill out the contact form, whether that's just to say, hey, or whether you want to be a guest on this podcast, or you know of someone that would be a great guest on this podcast. Go to my website and fill out the contact form, and I will get back to you. Without any further delay, actually, one further delay, you'll hear me talk about a little bit of Wi-Fi interference that I was unfortunately having. However, the episode turned out better than I thought it would with the recording. So you might see or hear some mention of that, or you might see some edits going on, and that's the reason why. Okay, now without any further ado, here's episode 25 of the Choir Conductor Podcast with Austin Wolford. Austin, thank you so much for being here for multiple reasons. Not only is it in the middle of the summer and you're taking your time out of your day, but also because 3 years ago?
Yeah, 3 years ago.
The unfortunate experience of having an entire episode lost, and that was yours. And
Yep.
I still feel terrible about it, but thanks so much for doing it. I think today will be even better than that lost episode.
I do too. I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, I mean, not much has happened since then.
No, not at all.
Yeah. So why don't you tell me and whoever's listening what you're kind of doing, and then maybe what you've done since I've last talked to you.
Sure. So right now I serve as the high school choir director for Quaker Valley High School. It's a school located about 15 minutes outside of Pittsburgh. And at that position, I direct 4 different choirs. I run a musical theater class. I run a music class for students with special needs. And I also music direct, and technically direct our spring musical every year as well. So quite a bit of stuff going on. Luckily, it's all sort of spaced out around the year. But my job, whenever I was hired, was basically to grow and build the choral program. So I started and I had 40 students signed up for concert choir. And now my average is about 110 students in concert choir over the last 4 years. So lots of growing and going to keep building. And we're trying to get to that 150 mark. So
Yeah,
that's where we're heading.
That's amazing. That's really good growth. And how big is your high school?
Our high school, we graduate about 180 students. The whole building, we average between 600 and 700, 9 through 12.
Okay. Yeah, and that's a good ratio then
Yeah,
for how much you're getting. That's
we're
great.
really fortunate. The entire music department, we have 2/3 of the student body involved in the music department in some way, which is great.
Wow. Yeah, that's huge. And so I saw in your email that you're doing some work for some kind of grad school. What do you got going on there?
I am. I'm doing an online master's in music education through Kent State in Ohio.
Okay.
Just going through in Pennsylvania where we have to get the required 24 credits of continued ed. So I figured why not just get a master's degree in music ed. So working towards that right now.
Yeah, that's great. And how's it going? I mean, I guess right now online learning is not that new or that
Right.
everyone's
It, it,
doing it now. So how's it going with that?
it's interesting. Right now I'm currently taking a music technology course for this master's program, but since the program's already structured to be online, there's really no difference. So we didn't have to change anything with the program. But what makes the program I'm in really nice is it's designed for teachers to take while they're still teaching. And that way you don't have to take a sabbatical or leave your teaching position to pursue your master's degree. And everything is completed 100% online. And you can actually graduate in just under 2 years with your master's, which is
Wow.
fantastic for not having to leave your job at all.
Yeah, that's great. No thesis required.
They say no thesis required. However, they just use some different wording. Your last course you end up taking, you do pretty much do a thesis. They just call it a capstone instead of a thesis.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's still
Yeah.
there.
Mine was also no thesis required, and I had to write a thesis.
Funny how that works.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's good for you. You know, it's just hard doing it whenever,
Right.
every day you're writing that much.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And so talk to me about kind of the breakdown of your different choirs. You teach
Yeah,
just at a high school and you have
I
different
do.
sections. So how's that run for you?
So we're a little different in how everything is set up. My curricular class, all I have is concert choir during the day.
Hmm.
However, my concert choir is split into 4 different sections. So
Okay.
I only have, whenever we do performances, I have one day before the concert that I actually hear the full group. Other than
Wow.
that, I'm doing all the preparation in 4 different sections. And no, it isn't section of soprano, section alto, section tenor,
Yeah.
section bass. It's all mixed. And the sizes are very different. I have a class with 10 students where all the other choir directors know this pain, but I have 8 sopranos, 1 alto, and a bass in that
Nice.
class. And then I also have a class of 42 students that is pretty well balanced. But that's during the day. And the reason it's split like that in my district is we allow our students to take choir and an instrumental class at the same time. So if they are in band, half the week they will be in my class for choir, and the other half of the week they will be in band. So they get double credit for one class period. It's tough to plan around that because some students are only in band, some are only in choir. So there will be days whenever it's a full instrumental day, I might only have 3 students in my class for that day. But the benefit of that is getting to work a little more one-on-one with those students. And if they have issues with anything, I can really focus in and help them a little bit better. And then whenever everyone comes back, we do more of the full ensemble stuff. But after school, I have an auditioned a cappella group just called the Vocal Ensemble, and it is a 20-member group. We hold auditions at the beginning of every year, and we do a lot of community performing. We go through, we're right outside of Swickley, and we'll go do a bunch of stuff during the holidays for them. The whole choir, we go down into Pittsburgh. We sing at the Allegheny County Courthouse every year, and just a lot of performing. And the ensemble, we do a lot of recording as well. Each year we record our different sets, and we apply for different invitationals and state stuff like that. We had applied for this year's conference, but obviously conferences didn't really happen, so we'll have to wait and see if there's a conference for next year, and we'll give it a shot again next year. But other than those two, I have a men's choir and a women's choir, which I actually pull from my concert choir. Okay. So everyone in concert choir is also enrolled in men's choir and women's choir. So my tenors and basses make up my men's choir, my sopranos and altos make up my women's choir. And basically I'll just set aside a little bit of rehearsal time and work specifically on that rep. And we only do 2 pieces for each group per concert. So it's not a whole lot for them, a whole lot extra for them to learn, but it works pretty well.
Yeah, that's great. And that kind of reminds me a little bit of, Knoch High School, which is where I first met you.
Exactly.
I was student teaching there. And then you went to Slippery Rock University, which is where I went, which is awesome. And that's how we got even more connected. How far is your school from Knoch?
My school from Knoch, it's about 45 minutes.
Oh, okay.
So we're a decent ways away, but I still only live 30 minutes from Knoch. So I think I'm actually closer to Knoch than the school that I teach at, but that's all right.
Nice. And so how did you or your school handle teaching online and teaching virtually this past several months?
Yeah, this has been something, it's been pretty drastically different for everyone that I've talked to. And my district, whenever we went online, like pretty much everyone else, the 13th of March was our last day. And we actually had our spring break coming up that following week. So where we're in a fortunate situation, unlike some other schools, we just took that week off for spring break. And then we took an additional week to try and regroup and figure out what we're going to do for remote learning. So we technically only lost 1 week of instruction instead of the 2. But when we went online, it was very limited, and we didn't want to push our students too hard because we didn't know what was going on at home. We didn't know who had access to what. So for me, with teaching choir, I had 2 days a week that they would have a choir class, and my instruction time was not to exceed 45 minutes for those days. And that is not only if I did a lecture, that's lecture and the time it would take to actually complete whatever homework I would give them. So it ended up being, if I posted a lecture, it would be like a 40-minute lecture. And then I would say, okay, whenever you come back on this day, you're going to do this. But I wouldn't give them too much to do on one day. I'm sure everyone was sort of in the same boat. It was tough to get buy-in from certain students, and then other students were there all the time. But it was just, how do you teach concert choir remotely online without singing as a group? Because that's sort of our profession, is all about being together and singing together. But we did do one of the virtual choirs, like everyone was trying to do.
Yeah.
What I did with ours, I wasn't going to mess around with any video, because that's just a whole other thing that I didn't want to have to worry about doing. So we did audio only, and we did For Good from Wicked. It was going to be our graduation song for this year. Since this group of seniors that's going through is actually my first group that I've had 9 through 12. So it was a special group for me, and they wanted to do that song. So we said, all right, we'll do it. But what I ended up doing is I sent them rehearsal files and said, hey, here's your part, record it, send it back to me, and then we'll see how it turns out. So of my 110 students, I actually had about 75 submit recordings, which was pretty great for a remote situation and me not being able to check in with them all that often. But it ended up turned out pretty great. And we used it for we did a virtual graduation ceremony. We featured it in there. And the kids and their families were really, really pleased with it. Is it as perfect as we would want it to be? Of course not. Of course, there's going to be mistakes. But something that I kept in mind while working on this virtual choir, which I thought was pretty important, is in this day of technology, whenever we see so many of those types of videos and you're seeing 600 member virtual choirs and it's perfect and all the consonants and vowels are like impeccable and it's insane, you have to remember what your group really is. And I know that I have a high school level group. Are they like the best high school group in the country? Of course not. Are they decent? Yeah, they're pretty good. They're all right. But I wasn't expecting that perfection from them. And I think that's important to allow some of those mistakes to come through, because if we were doing a live performance, that's what you would hear. And I didn't want to create something and go through and pitch correct all of the incorrect things, or hire people that we know that are professional singers to say, hey, can you sing this part for me real quick so I can have that? And I didn't want to do that because that's not giving my students a realistic result for everything. But just to keep that in mind and going through, I don't know what it's going to look like for the fall yet for me, but if we do more of this virtual learning and if people want to do more of these virtual choirs, I think just keep in mind what the group really sounds like. And you want them to be successful, but you also don't want to completely change everything to where it's not them.
Yeah. And that's a great philosophy and attitude to have for that. What kind of program did you use to put it all together?
It was actually really simple. I just used GarageBand.
Yeah.
That was it. And my school, we're fortunate, we're an Apple district. So
okay.
I have a MacBook provided by my school, and all of my students have iPads, and they are preloaded with GarageBand on them. And all I had them do was say, hey, plug in some headphones and listen to your part and record into GarageBand. And then they just sent me that MP3 file, and I lined everything up the best I could, and there it was.
Yeah, that's great. And it's probably less scary for the students knowing that they're not being videotaped.
Yes.
Because probably some of them that's like I don't want to do that, or a lot of them, because I did a virtual choir, and then we had 2 virtual worship bands, and that was like the thing that they were very self-conscious about.
Yeah, absolutely. I asked a bunch of my students, hey, would you prefer to do audio only, or do you want to do a video? I said, I can put the video together if you want it. And majority of my students said, no, let's just record the audio. That'd be great.
Yeah. And did you just send out the MP3 file, or did you like put images and make it into a video, or what did you end up doing?
I ended up gathering a bunch of images from the school year. I had students send me whatever pictures they had from choir that year, and we just did a big slideshow type thing with that underneath. And that's what I sent out to them for the finished product. But for the graduation, they did the same sort of thing, where I sent them the MP3 file, and they layered photos of all the senior actual commencement ceremony.
Yeah, that's great. That's smart. And I'm assuming this was all, basically you did this all for free. Like there was no major costs going into this.
No. And I know that there's people out there that they can put your virtual choir videos together for you for a fee, or they can mix the audio for you for a fee. But I mean, if you're used to using a program like GarageBand, it'll take some time, but I wouldn't say it's all that difficult to do it. It's just sort of going through and dragging and dropping. And one thing I did whenever I sent them the file is with the piano accompaniment right before that first end. So I knew, okay, this is where they're supposed to start. And then I could look at their audio track and just line that up for the starting point to get that pretty much lined up, and then a little bit of fine tuning here and there. But if you're familiar with GarageBand, I would say it takes some time, but it's really not overly difficult to line it up.
Yeah, so we're talking about, doing the whole virtual choir thing. I think that's a very accessible. Helps if I have the microphone. I'm trying a new setup, so this is a little bit different than I'm used to. So having the whole virtual choir be more accessible, doing the audio only thing, I think that's a good way to do it, because so many people are, video editing is hard.
It is. It's totally different game. Yeah. the audio lining that up, it takes time, but that's nothing compared to trying to put together all those videos. I mean, I attempted just doing a multi-track recording of myself and doing that with video, and just to put 4 videos together, it takes a long time, and I can't
Yeah.
imagine doing hundreds. That's crazy.
Yeah. So I did, we had 36 for mine, and it I don't know how many hours it took,
Yeah.
but going from that one and then doing 2 virtual worship bands, each one took like half as long as the previous one, just
Right.
because the learning curve is so high to figure out. But yeah, I think that's good for people to know that you can, you don't need this super high quality 4K HD, professional
Right.
thing. You can do it a different way.
Exactly. Yeah. It doesn't, I mean, there's a reason the ones you see on YouTube, they have millions of views, and that's because they're hiring video professionals that do this for a living. It's not like the secondary choir directors that are teaching this class. It's professional video editors that are putting those big projects together. And you can learn it, but it's just, is it going to be worth the time you put in whenever you could be doing other stuff with your students? You have to sort of decide that for yourself, I think.
Right. And so what other kind of things did you end up doing besides the virtual choir or the virtual
Yeah,
recording?
we spent a lot of time after I got that initial stuff out for the virtual choir. I I just flat out asked my students. I said, "Hey, what do you want to learn about? What's something that interests you?" And a lot of them said they wanted to learn more about the voice and their of the school year, just going through vocal anatomy and vocal technique and why certain people sound certain ways and what is belting and what about like being classically trained or the different types of techniques, which I had to pull out some of my books from Slippery Rock
Yeah.
to rework some of that stuff, but it it helped them a lot. And we just talked all about the different techniques, and we talked about different singers, and the anatomy was the big one. They don't really get to learn about that in the high school level. It's pretty much whenever you go to school for voice, then you'll learn about it. But to put together some videos for them of here's how everything works, this is what's actually happening. I got a bunch of emails from my students saying, "Oh, this makes a lot more sense now." And whenever I'm singing, I can imagine how that's working, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely interesting to hear that. Like that's the thing they're interested in, and that kind of
Right.
gave them the most benefit. Because you have no idea what is actually going on or even
Right.
what it looks like. Did you show them like a video of like the vocal cords?
I did. I did. And every year in my first day in my choir class,
Yeah.
I show them the video on YouTube. It's the quartet singing. I forget what piece they're singing, but it's a scope and you can see all of their vocal folds working. And I always start off the year by saying, if you want to watch this, you can, but I'm not going to force you to watch
Yeah.
this if you get squeamish.
Well, I think I lost that last bit. Go ahead and
Oh,
repeat that again.
yeah, no, it helps that my wife is currently in grad school for speech language pathology.
Oh, nice.
So she knows a lot more about the actual science and inner workings of the voice, which helped me. And she actually sat down and recorded a couple videos with me for my students so they could get it not just from the musician standpoint, but from the actual scientific standpoint as well, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. And so, like normally in the spring, you would have a musical, as you said. Did you end up having your musical?
We did.
That's
We
great.
we're we're one of the lucky ones. We actually closed on Saturday. I think that would have been like the 7th or the 8th, whatever that Saturday was, right before we shut down. Um, so we were one of the very few schools that actually got to put in their whole run of their show this year.
That's great. What did you end up doing?
We ended up doing Bye Bye Birdie this year. We've done a lot of newer shows in years past. Like last year we did Shrek. The year before that we did Seussical. So I wanted to give them a classic show where they could actually play, humans and not fairy tale characters. But
Yeah,
they really enjoyed it. They loved it. It was a great time.
yeah, that's great. And do you end up like directing or conducting the pit band for that,
I
or
didn't
what's your
do
responsibility?
my responsibilities for the show. I do all of the stage direction. I do half of the vocal music direction. I do all the ensemble stuff, and my wife does the solo music
Oh,
direction. Then I also design all of the sets and all of the lighting for the show, on top of also producing and all of that sort of stuff.
wow.
But it's a lot. That's pretty much my life from December through March.
Wow, yeah. So yes, you have more musical theater emphasis than probably a lot of choir directors do for their position.
Yeah, yeah.
Was-
It's a
Yeah,
big
sorry, go ahead.
a big portion of my job in the spring. Now it's all extracurricular, and I get an additional stipend to do all that. But the last couple years, I had just done the vocal music direction, and last year with Shrek was actually my first year taking over fully directing the show. And you really learn what you don't know in those situations. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of stuff I learned last year doing Shrek, and I was a lot better prepared this year for Bye Bye Birdie. But it's a lot of planning, and it helps that my cast, 95% of my cast members are also in my choir.
Oh, that's
So
great.
I'm pretty much using the same students for the whole thing. So I can see them in class and say, hey, remember, you have this dance rehearsal after school and you're going to be there until 6:15, instead of trying to track everyone down and all that sort of stuff. It makes it a lot easier to communicate everything. And whenever it gets down to tech week, assist with other stuff.
So why don't you tell or remind me and tell the people um, what kind of got you into music and kind of your musical background before you started teaching.
Yeah. So, as you had said earlier, you student taught at Knox High School, which is where I went to school. And I had an awesome choir director by the name of Michael Sippian. Um, he is the reason that I'm doing what I'm doing today. He was just incredible. I started with him when I was in 6th grade, and I had him the whole way through my senior year of high school, and went through the middle school choirs, the high school choirs, chamber singers. He introduced me to barbershop singing, and I was in a quartet in high school, which was like crazy to think of a high school barbershop quartet in the middle of a rural school,
Yeah.
but we had it. And because of him, I was like, hey, I can do this for a living. I can go and teach music, and I can sing and do choir stuff every day. And I had that thought in my sophomore year of high school whenever we were singing some stuff in chamber singers. So started looking into going into music education, and he also went to Slippery Rock. So I said, well, I should probably check that place out.
Yeah.
And I always tell my own students this now, but I would not recommend doing what I did. And I only applied to Slippery Rock, and
You only applied to Slippery Rock?
I only applied to Slippery Rock, and I only auditioned at Slippery Rock.
All or nothing.
Yep.
Wow.
So I luckily it worked out, but
Yeah.
ended up going to Slippery Rock in the fall of 2012 and graduated in spring of 2016. But majored in voice and studied under Dr. Colleen Gray, did classical training. And while I was there, I sang in the concert choir, I sang in chamber singers all 4 years, and I actually helped some other colleagues of mine bring back the Slippery Rock Men's Choir, and I sang in that for a couple of semesters, and then I ended up taking over directing that group while I was there.
Nice.
And then handed that off to some of the underclassmen whenever I left. But after I graduated in the spring of 2016, I actually went and did some landscaping, and I was a landscaper while I was searching for a music job, and interviewed a bunch of places. And I actually didn't hear back from the school that I work at until the first week of August about my initial application.
Oh, wow.
So I had actually already accepted another position, and I won't mention where, but
Yeah.
I had accepted another position before I heard anything. And they called me, said, hey, we want you to come interview. So I interviewed. At the interview, they said, we want you to teach a lesson. Can you be ready in a couple of days? I said, sure. Taught the lesson. And then later that day, I got a call from the superintendent offering me the position. told them on the phone I accept it. Had to call the other district and have the awkward conversation of thanks, but no thanks, which the other position wasn't in choir, and choir is definitely what I wanted to do. But
Yeah.
my current position, I actually started as a long-term sub. It wasn't a full-time job. It was only a 1-year long-term sub position, but the person before me had retired. It wasn't like someone was on sabbatical.
Okay.
And in March of my first year, they offered me a contract, and I've been there ever since, and it's been great.
Okay. Pardon the technical difficulties. But yeah, that's great. You know, you had kind of the faith that things were going to work out, and
Yep.
I'm glad that they did, and that you're in a, you know, good spot, and everything seems to be working out for you. That's fantastic.
I've been very fortunate with that position.
Yeah, that's great. That's happening. What advice would you give to your younger self? I know you said don't only apply to one place. What else would you give?
Don't do that. Also, I think the biggest thing is if you're going into the world of music ed, so many of us get into it because of one of the teachers that we had, and that's fantastic that we have that. But one thing that I would say is allow yourself to become your own teacher. Don't try and mimic everything that teacher did, where, yeah, I'm sure they'll be flattered, but there's a reason it works for them and it might not work for you. I spent probably the first 2 years of my undergraduate just trying to mimic whatever I could from my director, and it didn't always work. So by the time I got to my student teaching, I knew, hey, I have to try and figure out how to do it my way and do what works best for me. So I think if you go into the program knowing I'm going to make this my own version of what I want it to be, and I'm going to be my own type of teacher, while still pulling your tricks from those directors that you may have had and you may have really liked working with, just knowing that you have to be your own educator, you have to be your own type of director, because everything doesn't work for everyone. I know there's stuff that I do in my choirs that my director doesn't do. I'm sure there's stuff that you do, Zach, that works really great for you that wouldn't work for me, and vice versa. So just knowing that you have to make your own decisions, you have to figure out what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we kind of close things out?
I think the only other thing is just in the crazy world we live in, thank all the educators that are out there working, and just know that it's crazy times, but all of this is temporary. And I know that in the choir field, we're patiently awaiting to hear some of the results from some of these tests that are going on, at least at the time of this recording. And just know that, hey, this is only temporary. We will be able to get back together and do the stuff we love sooner or later. So just hold out, hold in, hang in there.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks so much, Austin. And I really appreciate it, especially all these years later after that last episode.
Yeah.
So thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Choir Conductor Podcast. Please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and leave a review. Go to zachthompsonmusic.weebly.com for show notes, an archive of podcast episodes, and free compositions. Have a great week.